The crack of a pistol shattered the dawn silence on the outskirts of Redemption Creek, Texas, in the spring of 1875. The bullet tore through Beau Easton's shoulder, spinning him to the ground as his own brother lowered the smoking gun, a look of cold fury etched across his face that mirrored Beau's own. Blood seeped through Beau's worn cotton shirt as he clutched at the wound, his eyes meeting his brother's without surprise or anger, just a weary acceptance that had been years in the making. "Daniel," Beau gasped, the pain radiating through his chest as he spoke his brother's name. "I reckon I had that coming." The morning air hung heavy with the scent of gunpowder and betrayal as Daniel Easton stepped back, his hand trembling slightly despite the steadiness of his voice. "You know why, Beau. You know exactly why." Dust swirled around their boots, disturbed by the slight breeze that carried the sound of their confrontation across the empty plains. 15 years of brotherhood, shattered by a single bullet and the woman they had both loved. Beau didn't attempt to stand, instead watching as his younger brother mounted his horse and rode away without looking back, the distance between them growing with each passing second until Daniel was nothing more than a silhouette against the rising sun. Only when Daniel had disappeared completely did Beau allow himself to fully feel the pain, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he pressed his palm against the wound. The bullet had gone clean through, a small mercy considering the alternative. With effort, he pulled himself to his feet, swaying slightly as he made his way toward his own horse, which had skittered several yards away when the shot rang out. "Come on, Jasper," he murmured, reaching for the reins with his good arm. "We need to get to town before I bleed out on this God-forsaken dirt." The ride to Redemption Creek was agonizing, each step of his horse sending jolts of pain through his wounded shoulder. By the time the small settlement came into view, Beau's vision had begun to blur, the world around him tilting dangerously as he struggled to remain upright in the saddle. Dr. Harrison's office stood at the edge of town, a modest wooden building with a small sign hanging from the porch. Beau practically fell from his horse, stumbling up the steps and through the door before his legs gave out beneath him. "Good Lord." The doctor jumped to his feet, rushing forward to catch Beau before he collapsed completely. "What in heaven's name happened to you, Easton?" "Family disagreement," Beau managed, his voice barely above a whisper as the doctor helped him onto an examination table. Dr. Harrison worked quickly, cutting away the blood-soaked fabric of Beau's shirt to reveal the angry wound beneath. "Bullet went clean through." "You're lucky an inch to the right and we wouldn't be having this conversation." Beau's laugh was bitter and short-lived as pain shot through him again. "Luck ain't exactly been my companion these days, Doc. This is going to hurt," the doctor warned, reaching for a bottle of whiskey. He poured a generous amount over the wound, causing Beau to hiss through clenched teeth. "I need to clean and stitch you up. Try not to move." As the doctor worked, Beau's mind drifted to the events that had led to this moment. 3 months ago, Daniel had brought home a wife, a beautiful young woman named Sarah whom he'd met in Austin. From the moment Beau laid eyes on her, he'd felt something shift inside him, a recognition he couldn't explain. And when Sarah looked at him, he'd seen the same recognition in her eyes. They'd fought it, both of them. God knows they had tried, but the pull between them had been undeniable, growing stronger with each passing day until one afternoon, during a thunderstorm when Daniel was away in Fort Worth on business, they'd surrendered to it. Just once. A single moment of weakness that had cost them everything. Sarah had confessed to Daniel upon his return, unable to live with the guilt. Beau had been prepared for his brother's rage, for the confrontation that would inevitably come. What he hadn't expected was the 3 weeks of silence that followed, the cold detachment in Daniel's eyes whenever their paths crossed on the ranch they shared. Until this morning, when Daniel had finally sought the retribution Beau knew he deserved. "There, doctor," Harrison said, cutting through Beau's thoughts as he finished the last stitch. "You'll need to keep it clean and change the bandages daily, no riding for at least a week, and no heavy lifting for a month." Beau nodded absently, his mind still on his brother. "Thanks, Doc. What do I owe you?" "We can settle up later. For now, you need rest." There's a room above the office you can use tonight. I don't want you riding back to your ranch in this condition." Too exhausted to argue, Beau allowed the doctor to help him to the small bedroom upstairs, where he collapsed onto the narrow bed. Sleep came quickly, dragging him into a fitful darkness filled with dreams of his brother's accusing eyes and Sarah's tear-stained face. When he awoke, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. For a moment, he couldn't remember where he was or how he'd gotten there. Then the pain in his shoulder returned with full force, bringing with it the memory of Daniel's betrayed expression as he pulled the trigger. A soft knock at the door drew his attention. "Mr. Easton, are you awake?" The voice belonged to a woman not the doctor's wife, whom Beau had met on several occasions, but someone unfamiliar. "Come in," he called, wincing as he pushed himself into a sitting position. The door opened to reveal a young woman carrying a tray with what appeared to be soup and bread. She was perhaps in her mid-20s, with chestnut hair pulled back in a simple bun and eyes the color of a summer storm. She wasn't conventionally beautiful, but there was something striking about her features, a quiet strength that caught Beau's attention immediately. "Doctor." "Harrison asked me to bring you something to eat," she explained, setting the tray on the bedside table. "I'm Lillian Faulkner. I help out around here sometimes." "Beau Easton," he replied, though from her lack of surprise at his appearance, he guessed she already knew who he was. "Thank you for the food, Miss Faulkner," she nodded, studying him with an intensity that made him shift uncomfortably. "The doctor told me you'd been shot. He didn't mention it was your own brother who did the shooting." Beau's eyes narrowed. "Town's got a way of knowing everyone's business, doesn't it? It's a small place," she acknowledged with a slight shrug. "And people talk, especially when it involves the Easton brothers." There was something in her tone that suggested she knew more than she was letting on. Beau reached for the bowl of soup, partly to give his hands something to do and partly because he suddenly realized how hungry he was. "So, what's the verdict?" he asked between spoonfuls. "Am I the villain in this particular story?" Lillian's expression remained neutral. "I don't know enough about your situation to make that judgment, Mr. Easton, but you've heard enough to know my brother shot me." "I've heard that, yes." She paused, her gaze steady on his face. "I've also heard you say you deserved it." Beau froze, the spoon halfway to his mouth. "And how exactly did you hear that?" "I was gathering herbs near where it happened," she explained. "I heard the shot and hid. I saw you fall, heard what you said to him before he rode off." The soup suddenly tasted like ash in Beau's mouth. He set the bowl aside, no longer hungry. "So you were spying on a private moment between me and my brother?" "I wasn't spying. I was trying not to get caught in the middle of what looked like a very dangerous situation." Her voice remained calm despite the accusation in his. "And for what it's worth, I don't think anyone deserves to be shot by their own family, regardless of what they've done." Beau laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "Then you don't know what I did." "No," she agreed, "I don't. But I know that guilt can make us believe we deserve punishment far greater than our crimes warrant." There was something in her words that suggested personal experience, a depth of understanding that went beyond mere observation. It made Beau look at her more closely, wondering what secrets this quiet woman might be harboring. "You sound like you're speaking from experience, Miss Faulkner." A shadow crossed her face, there and gone so quickly he might have imagined it. "We all have our regrets, Mr. Easton. Some are just more visible than others." Before he could respond, she turned toward the door. "You should finish your soup before it gets cold. Dr. Harrison will check on you in the morning." "Wait," Beau called as she reached for the doorknob. "You said you saw what happened." "Will you tell the sheriff?" Lillian paused, considering. "Do you want me to?" The question caught him off guard. Did he want Daniel to face consequences for shooting him? The answer came more easily than he expected. "No, this is between me and my brother." She nodded, as if his response confirmed something she already knew. "Then what happens between you and your brother will stay between you and your brother. Good night, Mr. Easton." As the door closed behind her, Beau found himself staring at the space she had occupied, unsettled by the encounter in ways he couldn't quite define. There had been no judgment in her eyes, no condemnation in her voice, only a quiet understanding that seemed to penetrate the walls he'd built around himself. He finished the soup mechanically, his mind replaying their conversation as darkness fell completely outside the window. When sleep finally claimed him again, his dreams were filled not with his brother's accusing gaze or Sarah's tears, but with storm-gray eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. Morning brought with it a dull ache in Beau's shoulder and the sound of rain against the window. He opened his eyes to find Dr. Harrison checking his bandages, the older man's brow furrowed in concentration. "How's it looking, Doc?" Beau asked, his voice rough with sleep. "Better than I expected," Harrison admitted, rewrapping the wound with fresh bandages. "No signs of infection, which is always the biggest worry with gunshot wounds. Still, I'd like you to stay another day just to be safe." Beau started to protest but thought better of it when a sharp pain shot through his shoulder as he tried to sit up. "Fine, one more day." The doctor nodded, gathering his supplies. "Miss Faulkner will bring you breakfast shortly. She mentioned you two spoke last night." "Briefly," Beau confirmed, watching the doctor's face carefully. "She seems perceptive." Harrison's expression softened slightly. "Lillian has seen her share of trouble, makes her good at reading people." He hesitated, then added, "She's been through more than most folks realize. Came here about a year ago after losing her husband and child to influenza back east." The information hit Beau with unexpected force. "I'm sorry to hear that. She doesn't talk about it much," Harrison continued, moving toward the door. "But I thought you should know, she understands loss better than most." After the doctor left, Beau found himself thinking about Lillian Faulkner with newfound interest. The quiet strength he'd sensed in her made more sense now, tempered as it had been by profound grief. He wondered what had brought her to Redemption Creek, of all places a dusty, unremarkable town that most people passed through on their way to somewhere else. When she appeared with his breakfast a short while later, he saw her in a different light, noticing the subtle sadness that lingered around her eyes despite the polite smile she offered him. "The doctor says you're healing well," she remarked, setting down a plate of eggs and biscuits. Beau nodded, suddenly unsure what to say. The knowledge of her loss weighed on him, making their previous conversation seem trivial by comparison. "Thank you for breakfast," he finally managed. She seemed to sense his discomfort, her head tilting slightly as she studied him. "Doctor. Harrison told you about my past, didn't he?" Caught off guard by her directness, Beau could only nod. "I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Faulkner." "Thank you." She accepted his condolences with the practiced grace of someone who had heard those words many times before. "But I didn't come here for your pity, Mr. Easton." "Of course not," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to, it's all right," she interrupted, her voice softening. "People never know quite what to say when they learn about Thomas and Emily. I've grown accustomed to it." The names hung in the air between them, Thomas and Emily. Her husband and child, no longer abstractions but real people with names who had lived and been loved and lost. "How old was your daughter?" Beau found himself asking. "4," Lillian answered, a brief smile touching her lips at the memory. She had just learned to write her name the week before she got sick. The simple statement, delivered with such quiet dignity, struck Beau harder than he expected. He thought of his own family, the brother who now hated him, the parents they had lost years ago to a wagon accident, the life he had built and then destroyed with a single moment of weakness. "I'm 30 years old," he said suddenly, unsure why he was sharing this information but feeling compelled to offer something of himself in return for her openness. "And sometimes I still feel like I have no idea what I'm doing with my life." Lillian's expression softened. "I don't think that feeling ever goes away, Mr. Easton. We just get better at pretending we know what we're doing." The observation drew a genuine laugh from Beau, surprising them both. "I'm not even sure I've mastered the pretending part." "Well, you've got time," she said, moving toward the door. "Unless you make a habit of antagonizing family members with firearms." The jest caught him off guard, coming as it did from someone who seemed so reserved. But there was a sparkle in her eyes that suggested a sense of humor he hadn't noticed before, hidden beneath her composed exterior. "I'll try to avoid that in the future," he promised, finding himself smiling despite the circumstances that had brought him here. Lillian nodded, her hand on the doorknob. "See that you do, Mr. Easton. I'd hate to have to bring you soup again." With that, she was gone, leaving Beau staring after her with the distinct impression that Lillian Faulkner was far more complex than he had initially thought. The day passed slowly, with Dr. Harrison checking on him periodically and Lillian bringing his meals. Each time she came, they spoke a little longer, their conversations gradually shifting from polite small talk to more meaningful exchanges. She told him about growing up in Boston, the daughter of a schoolteacher who had valued education above all else. He shared stories of the ranch he and Daniel had built after their parents died, transforming the small plot of land into one of the most successful operations in the county. Neither mentioned Daniel's shooting again, nor did Beau explain what he had done to deserve his brother's wrath. But as evening approached, he found himself wanting to tell her, needing someone to understand the full weight of his guilt. When she brought his dinner, a simple stew with fresh bread, he asked her to stay a while if she wasn't too busy. "I've taken up enough of your time today," he said as she set down the tray, "but I'd appreciate the company if you can spare it." Lillian seemed surprised by the request, but pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat down. "I suppose I can stay for a bit. The doctor's already closed the office for the evening and I don't have anywhere else to be." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Beau finally gathered the courage to speak the words that had been building inside him all day. "I betrayed my brother," he said quietly, setting aside his bowl. "That's why he shot me." Lillian's expression remained neutral, though her eyes reflected a deep attention. "I assumed it was something like that." His wife, Sarah, Beau paused, the words sticking in his throat. There was something between us, just once, but once was enough." "I see," Lillian said, her voice free of judgment. "I've never done anything like that before," he continued, needing her to understand. "I've made plenty of mistakes in my life, but betraying family, that was never something I thought I was capable of." "What happened after?" she asked. Sarah told him she couldn't live with the guilt, and I don't blame her for that. Beau sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Daniel didn't say a word about it for weeks, just went about his business like nothing had happened. Then this morning, he asked me to ride out to check the fence line with him, and when we got far enough from the house, he pulled his gun." "And you told him you deserved it," Lillian finished. Beau nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "Because I did. If our positions were reversed, I might have done worse than shoot him in the shoulder." Lillian was quiet for a long moment, considering his words. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but firm. "You know what I think, Mr. Easton? I think you deserve better." The statement was so unexpected that Beau's head snapped up, his eyes meeting hers in confusion. "Better than what? Being shot by my own brother after I slept with his wife. Better than believing one mistake defines who you are," she clarified. "Yes, you betrayed your brother's trust. Yes, you did something that caused immense pain, but that doesn't mean you deserve to be shot, or that you're beyond redemption." Her words struck a chord so deep within him that Beau felt his chest tighten with emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel. "How can you say that? You don't even know me." "I know enough," Lillian replied, her gaze steady. "I know that a truly bad man wouldn't feel the guilt you clearly feel, wouldn't acknowledge that he deserved punishment, wouldn't be tortured by what he'd done." "Guilt doesn't undo the damage," Beau pointed out. "No, it doesn't," she agreed, "but it's where healing starts, for you, for your brother, for everyone involved." The compassion in her voice nearly undid him. Beau turned away, unwilling to let her see the tears that threatened to fall. "I don't know how to fix this." "Maybe you can't," Lillian said gently. "Maybe some things can't be fixed, only lived with, but that doesn't mean you have to let them destroy you." They sat in silence for a while, her words hanging between them like a lifeline Beau wasn't sure he deserved to grab hold of. When he finally looked at her again, he saw not pity in her eyes, but a kind of understanding that came from having faced her own darkness. "How did you do it?" he asked quietly. "After losing your family, how did you find the strength to keep going?" Lillian's smile was tinged with sadness. "One day at a time. Some days, 1 hour at a time. I'm not going to tell you it gets easier because that would be a lie, but you find ways to carry it. And eventually, you realize that carrying it is a form of strength, not weakness." As darkness fell outside the window, they continued talking, sharing pieces of themselves that they rarely revealed to others. Beau told her about growing up on the ranch, about losing his parents when he was 18 and Daniel just 16, about the promise he'd made to his father to look after his younger brother, a promise he had now broken in the worst possible way. Lillian spoke of her life in Boston, of meeting Thomas when she was 21, and he was a young doctor full of ambition and ideals. She described the joy of Emily's birth and the 3 happy years that followed, and the devastation of losing them both within days of each other to an illness that spread through their neighborhood like wildfire. After they died, I couldn't stay there anymore, she explained. Everything reminded me of them, so I packed what I could carry and headed west. I had no destination in mind, just away from the memories. When I reached Redemption Creek, I was nearly out of money and completely out of hope. Doctor Harrison found me half-starved and offered me a job and a place to stay. Seems like he has a habit of taking in strays, Beau observed with a small smile. Lillian laughed softly. Yes, I suppose he does, though you're not staying permanently, are you? The question gave Beau pause. He hadn't thought beyond the immediate future getting well enough to leave the doctor's office. But what then? He couldn't go back to the ranch, not with Daniel there and the wound between them still raw. And Sarah. He couldn't face her again, not after what had happened. I don't know, he admitted. I haven't exactly planned that far ahead. Well, Lillian said, rising from her chair, you have at least another day to figure it out. Dr. Harrison won't let you leave before then. Beau nodded, suddenly reluctant to see her go. Thank you, Miss Faulkner. For listening, for not judging. Lillian, she corrected him with a gentle smile. I think after all we've shared tonight, you can call me Lillian. Lillian, he repeated, the name feeling right on his lips. Thank you. She paused at the door, looking back at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Good night, Beau. Try to get some rest. As the door closed behind her, Beau lay back on the pillows, his mind spinning with everything they had discussed. For the first time since Daniel had pulled the trigger, he felt a flicker of something other than guilt and self-loathing, a small spark of possibility that perhaps, despite everything, he might find a way forward. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the rain of the previous day having washed away the dust that perpetually hung in the air of Redemption Creek. Beau woke feeling stronger, the pain in his shoulder reduced to a dull throb that was manageable without the laudanum doctor. Harrison had offered the first night. When Lillian brought his breakfast, there was a subtle shift in their interaction, a new ease between them born of the confidences they had shared the night before. She asked about his shoulder, and he inquired about her morning, the simple exchange carrying an undercurrent of something neither was ready to name. Dr. Harrison says you can leave tomorrow if you continue improving, she informed him as she poured coffee into a mug. He's impressed with how quickly you're healing. Eastons have always been hard to kill, Beau joked, though the humor fell flat as he remembered it was an Easton who had tried to kill him in the first place. Lillian noticed his change in expression. Have you decided where you'll go? I was thinking about that last night, Beau admitted. I can't go back to the ranch, not yet. I thought maybe I'd head to San Antonio for a while, give Daniel some space. That's probably wise, she agreed. Time has a way of putting things in perspective. Before she could say more, the door burst open and Dr. Harrison hurried in, his face drawn with concern. Beau, there's someone here to see you. It's your brother. The announcement sent a jolt of adrenaline through Beau's system. He instinctively reached for the gun that wasn't there, his body tensing for a confrontation. Is he armed? Beau asked, his voice low. No, Harrison assured him. I checked before letting him in the building. He says he just wants to talk. Beau exchanged a glance with Lillian, whose expression had grown serious. It's your choice, she said quietly. You don't have to see him if you're not ready. After a moment's consideration, Beau nodded. Send him up, Doc, but stay close just in case. As Harrison left to fetch Daniel, Lillian moved closer to the bed. Are you sure about this? No, Beau admitted with a grim smile, but I can't avoid him forever. Might as well get it over with now. Lillian hesitated, then reached out to squeeze his hand briefly. I'll be right outside if you need anything. The simple gesture of support meant more to Beau than he could express. He nodded his thanks, watching as she slipped out of the room just as footsteps sounded on the stairs. Daniel Easton appeared in the doorway a moment later, looking as though he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, his normally clean-shaven face showing several days' growth of beard. He stood awkwardly at the threshold, as if unsure of his welcome. "Daniel," Beau acknowledged, his voice carefully neutral. "Beau," Daniel stepped into the room, his gaze immediately going to the bandaged shoulder visible beneath Beau's nightshirt. You're all right, I'll live," Beau confirmed. "Doc says the bullet went clean through." "No permanent damage." Daniel nodded, seeming at a loss for words now that he was actually face to face with his brother. He paced the small room, running a hand through his hair in a gesture so familiar it made Beau's chest ache with a sudden longing for the easy relationship they had once shared. "I shouldn't have shot you," Daniel finally said, stopping at the foot of the bed. "I was angry, God, I was so angry, but I shouldn't have done it." Beau studied his brother's face, seeing the conflict there. "I betrayed you, Daniel, with Sarah. I can't blame you for wanting revenge." "It wasn't revenge," Daniel said, his voice breaking slightly. "I don't know what it was. I've been so angry, Beau, at you, at Sarah, at myself. I didn't plan to shoot you, I saw you standing there, and suddenly the gun was in my hand, and I was pulling the trigger before I even realized what I was doing." The raw honesty in his brother's voice cut through Beau's defenses. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For what it's worth, I never meant to hurt you. It wasn't planned." It wasn't love, it was a mistake, the biggest mistake of my life." Daniel sank into the chair Lillian had occupied the night before, his shoulders slumping with exhaustion. "Sarah's gone," he said after a moment. "She left yesterday. Said she couldn't stay, knowing what she'd caused between us." The news hit Beau harder than he expected. Not because he harbored any romantic feelings for Sarah, what had happened between them had been born of loneliness and poor judgment. Not love, but because it meant Daniel had lost his wife as well as his trust in his brother. "I'm sorry," Beau said again, the words inadequate but all he had to offer. "Where did she go?" "Back to her family in Austin," Daniel replied, staring at his hands. "She left a letter for you. I didn't read it." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and placed it on the bedside table. "I should hate you," he continued, his voice low. "I tried to, God knows I tried, but you're my brother, Beau, the only family I have left." The admission hung between them, a fragile thread of connection neither was quite ready to grasp. Beau chose his next words carefully, aware that what he said now could either heal or further damage the bond they shared. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Daniel. Not now, maybe not ever, but I want you to know that I never stopped being your brother, even when I failed at being a good one." Daniel looked up, meeting Beau's gaze directly for the first time since entering the room. "I don't know if we can fix this," he said honestly, "but I don't want to lose you too." It wasn't forgiveness, they both knew the road to that would be long and difficult, but it was a starting point. A willingness to try that Beau hadn't dared hope for when he'd seen his brother in the doorway. "The ranch is yours," Beau said after a moment. "I'll sign my half over to you, it's the least I can do." Daniel shook his head. "No, that ranch is as much yours as it is mine. We built it together, Beau, I won't take that from you." "Then what do we do?" Beau asked, genuinely uncertain of the path forward. "I don't know," Daniel admitted. I needed to see that you were all right. To tell you I was sorry for shooting you, even if part of me still thinks you deserved it." Despite the gravity of the situation, Beau felt a small smile tug at his lips. "Well, according to Miss Faulkner, I deserve better." Daniel raised an eyebrow, momentarily distracted from their troubles. "Miss Faulkner, the doctor's assistant," Beau explained, aware of the slight warmth that crept into his voice when he spoke of her. "She's been taking care of me." "I see," Daniel said, a hint of his old perceptiveness showing through as he studied his brother's face. "And she thinks you deserve better than being shot by your own brother, among other things," Beau confirmed, not elaborating on the deeper conversations he and Lillian had shared. Daniel nodded slowly, rising from the chair. "Maybe she's right. Maybe we both deserve better than letting this tear us apart completely." He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. "I'm going back to the ranch. When you're well enough, we can talk more then." It wasn't much, but it was more than Beau had dared to hope for. "I'll be there," he promised. Give me a week or so to heal up and we'll figure this out together. After Daniel left, Beau sat in silence for several minutes, processing the unexpected turn the morning had taken. When Lillian returned, her eyes full of questions, he found himself recounting the conversation with a sense of cautious optimism he hadn't felt since before the shooting. He doesn't hate me, Beau concluded, still sounding somewhat surprised by this fact. He's angry and hurt, and we have a long way to go, but he doesn't hate me. Lillian smiled, genuine pleasure lighting her features. That's a start, a good one. He mentioned that Sarah left, Beau said, gesturing to the letter on the bedside table. Went back to Austin, she left this for me. Are you going to read it? Lillian asked, her tone carefully neutral. Beau considered the question, looking at the folded paper that represented the catalyst for so much pain. Not yet, he decided. Maybe not ever. Whatever she has to say, it won't change what happened. And right now, I'd rather focus on moving forward than looking back. Lillian nodded, seeming to approve of his decision. Speaking of moving forward, Dr. Harrison says you can leave tomorrow morning if you promise to take it easy. I suppose I should figure out where I'm going then, Beau mused. Daniel wants me to come back to the ranch once I'm healed up so we can talk things through properly, but I think we both need some time apart first. That seems wise, Lillian agreed. Do you have friends in town you could stay with? Beau shook his head. A few acquaintances, but no one I'd impose on. I was thinking I might head to San Antonio for a while, get a room somewhere, maybe look for work that doesn't involve too much heavy lifting. Lillian was quiet for a moment, seeming to debate something with herself. There's another option, she finally said. Dr. Harrison has a small cabin on the edge of his property. It's nothing fancy, just one room with a stove and a bed, but it's private and it's available. He mentioned it might be suitable for you while you recover. That's generous of him, Beau said, surprised by the offer, but I wouldn't want to impose. It's not an imposition, Lillian assured him. The cabin's been sitting empty for months. The doctor used to rent it out, but the last tenant left in the winter and he hasn't bothered finding a new one. He says you'd be welcome to stay there until you decide what's next. The offer was tempting, not least because it would mean staying close to Lillian. In the few days since they'd met, Beau had found himself increasingly drawn to her quiet strength and compassionate wisdom. She had seen him at his worst wounded, guilt-ridden, broken, and hadn't turned away. If he's sure, then yes, Beau decided. Please thank him for me. I'll pay rent, of course. He suggested you might help around the office in exchange, Lillian said with a small smile. Nothing strenuous until your shoulder heals, but there are always errands to run and supplies to organize. The arrangement seemed more than fair, and Beau nodded his agreement. Tell him I accept his terms, and Lillian, thank you for everything these past few days. Her cheeks colored slightly at his gratitude, a reaction that Beau found unexpectedly charming. You're welcome, Beau. I'm glad I could help, as she left to inform Dr. Harrison of his decision. Beau found himself looking forward to the coming days with a sense of anticipation he hadn't felt in a long time. The guilt over his betrayal of Daniel still weighed heavily on him, and he knew the road to reconciliation with his brother would be difficult. But for the first time since the shooting, he allowed himself to believe that there might be a future worth hoping for, one that, perhaps, included the woman who had told him he deserved better than the punishment he thought he deserved. The cabin was indeed small, but clean and well-maintained, with a comfortable bed, a small stove, a table with 2 chairs, and a bookshelf stocked with medical texts and a few novels. It stood about 50 yards behind the doctor's house, offering privacy while still being close enough to the main building that Beau could easily walk back and forth as his shoulder healed. Dr. Harrison helped him settle in on his first day out of the sick room, bringing extra blankets and making sure Beau knew how to operate the stove properly. It gets cold at night, even in spring, he warned, and I don't want you catching a chill while that shoulder's still healing. I appreciate all of this, Doc, Beau said, genuinely touched by the older man's kindness. I won't forget it. Harrison waved off his gratitude. Just doing my job. Besides, Lillian seems to have taken a liking to you, and her judgment of character has never steered me wrong before. The casual observation sent a pleasant warmth through Beau's chest. She's been very kind. Kindness is in her nature, Harrison agreed, but she's also cautious, especially since losing her family. The fact that she's vouched for you says something about your character, Easton. Before Beau could respond, the doctor continued. Now, remember what I said about that shoulder. No heavy lifting for at least 3 weeks. Change the bandage daily, and if you notice any redness, swelling, or unusual discharge, come to me immediately. Yes, sir, Beau agreed, fighting a smile at the doctor's fussing. Lillian will check on you later today. Make sure you have everything you need. With that, Harrison headed back to his office, leaving Beau alone to explore his temporary home. The cabin, despite its simplicity, felt like a sanctuary after the events of the past week. Beau moved about the small space, examining the books on the shelf, testing the comfort of the bed, looking out the single window at the view of the doctor's garden, and beyond it, the rolling plains that stretched toward the horizon. By the time Lillian arrived that afternoon, carrying a basket of food and fresh bandages, Beau had settled in comfortably, even dozing for a while on the bed as his body continued to recover from the trauma of the gunshot wound. "How are you feeling?" she asked, setting the basket on the table and removing its contents, a loaf of fresh bread, cheese, cold ham, and a jar of preserves. "Better," Beau said truthfully. "It's good to be up and about, even if about is limited to this cabin for now." Lillian smiled, arranging the food on a plate for him. "You'll be back on your feet properly in no time. Dr. Harrison says your wound is healing remarkably well." As she worked, Beau found himself watching her with undisguised interest. Today, she wore a simple blue dress that complemented her eyes, her chestnut hair caught up in its usual practical bun. There was an efficiency to her movements, a grace born of self-sufficiency rather than formal training. "Tell me more about Boston," he requested as she handed him the plate. "What was it like growing up there?" Lillian seemed surprised by his interest but obliged, sitting across from him at the small table. "It was different from here in almost every way," she began. "Crowded, noisy, always bustling with activity. My father was a teacher at a boys' academy, so education was highly valued in our home. I learned to read before I was 5, and by the time I was 12, I'd read every book in our house twice over. Did you want to be a teacher like your father?" Beau asked, genuinely curious about the path that had led her from a Boston school teacher's daughter to a doctor's assistant in a small Texas town. "For a while," she admitted. "But then I met Thomas when I was 21, and he was studying medicine. His passion for healing inspired me. I started reading his medical texts, learning alongside him. By the time we married, I knew enough to assist him in his practice." "So that's how you ended up working with Dr. Harrison," Beau realized. "You already had experience," Lillian nodded. "When I arrived here, I was lost, grieving. I had no plan beyond getting as far from Boston as possible. Dr. Harrison took one look at me and saw someone who needed purpose as much as she needed shelter. He offered me both." The simple narrative carried undertones of profound pain that Beau could sense but not fully comprehend. He'd experienced loss. His parents' deaths had left a hole in his life that had never quite healed, but he couldn't imagine the devastation of losing both a spouse and a child in such quick succession. "Do you ever think about going back?" he asked carefully. "To Boston, I mean." Lillian's gaze turned distant, focusing on something beyond the cabin walls. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Not to stay, but perhaps to visit my father's grave. He died 6 months after Thomas and Emily. A heart attack, they said, but I think it was grief. He adored Emily." "I'm sorry," Beau said softly. "That's a lot of loss for anyone to bear." She refocused on him, her expression clearing. "It is, but as I told you before, you learn to carry it, and there are good days now, not just bearable ones." A small smile touched her lips. "Today, for instance, is a good day." The simple statement, delivered with such quiet honesty, moved Beau deeply. "Because your patient is on the mend, partly," she acknowledged, a hint of something warm in her eyes, "and partly because I enjoy your company, Beau Easton. You're easier to talk to than most people I've met." The admission pleased him more than it probably should have. "I feel the same way about you," he confessed, "which is strange, considering the circumstances under which we met." "Sometimes difficulty creates connection more quickly than comfort," Lillian observed. When we're at our most vulnerable, pretense falls away. There's no energy left for it. Is that why you told me about Thomas and Emily that first night? Beau asked, because pretense had fallen away. Lillian considered the question thoughtfully. Perhaps, or maybe it was because you shared your own pain so honestly. Vulnerability invites vulnerability. Their conversation continued as the afternoon light shifted to evening, moving from personal histories to lighter topics, books they had read, places they had seen or hoped to see, small observations about life in Redemption Creek. Beau found himself laughing more than he had in months, drawn out of the dark place he'd been inhabiting since his betrayal of Daniel. When Lillian finally rose to leave, reluctance evident in her movements, Beau felt an answering reluctance to see her go. "Will you come tomorrow?" he asked, trying to keep his tone casual. "Of course," she assured him with a smile. "Someone needs to check that shoulder and bring you food, unless you'd prefer Dr. Harrison's company." "Definitely yours," Beau said without hesitation, earning another smile from Lillian as she gathered her things. At the door, she paused, looking back at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Good night, Beau. Try to rest." "Good night, Lillian," he replied, watching as she stepped out into the gathering darkness, closing the door softly behind her. Alone in the cabin, Beau found himself replaying their conversation, analyzing each exchange, each smile, each moment when their eyes had met across the small table. He was attracted to her, that much he could admit to himself. But it was more than physical attraction. It was a pull toward the person she was, the strength and compassion that defined her. As he prepared for bed, Beau acknowledged that his feelings for Lillian were growing in ways that both excited and frightened him. The last woman he had felt drawn to had been his brother's wife, and that attraction had led to disaster. Could he trust himself to navigate these new feelings responsibly? Did he even deserve the chance to try, given what he had done? With these questions circling in his mind, Beau drifted off to sleep, his dreams filled with storm-gray eyes and a voice that told him he deserved better than he believed. The following days fell into a rhythm that brought an unexpected peace to Beau's life. Each morning, he would wake early, eat a simple breakfast, and read one of the books from the shelf. Dr. Harrison would stop by mid-morning to check his wound and chat briefly before returning to his patients. In the afternoon, Lillian would visit, bringing food and fresh bandages, staying longer each day as Beau's strength returned and their conversations deepened. They spoke of everything and nothing: childhood memories, hopes for the future, observations about the small world of Redemption Creek. Beau told her about growing up on the ranch, about learning to break horses from his father, about the dreams he and Daniel had shared for expanding their land and building something that would last. Lillian, in turn, shared more of her life in Boston, the winters so cold your breath froze in the air, the summers by the harbor watching ships come and go, the vibrant energy of a city constantly in motion. She spoke of meeting Thomas at a lecture on modern medicine, of their courtship conducted largely through discussions of scientific advancement, of the joy they had found in building a life centered around healing others. With each passing day, Beau found himself more drawn to her intelligence, her resilience, the quiet dignity with which she carried her grief. And sometimes, in unguarded moments, he thought he saw an answering attraction in her eyes, quickly masked but undeniably present. A week after moving into the cabin, Beau received a letter from Daniel. It was brief but significant. Daniel acknowledged that they needed to talk, suggested that Beau take the time he needed to heal, and expressed a cautious hope that they might find a way forward together. He mentioned that he had begun repairs on the fence line they had been inspecting the day of the shooting, a small gesture that nonetheless signaled his intention to continue the work they had started together. "It's a good sign," Lillian said when Beau showed her the letter. They were sitting outside the cabin, enjoying the warm spring afternoon. Beau's shoulder had improved enough that he could move his arm without wincing, though it was still tender when he overexerted himself. "It is," Beau agreed, folding the letter carefully and returning it to its envelope. "Better than I expected, honestly. I thought it might be months before he was ready to speak to me again." "Family bonds are stronger than most," Lillian observed. even when they're tested severely. Beau nodded, his thoughts turning to his brother and the uncertain future of their relationship. I've been thinking about what happens next, he said after a moment. Daniel and I will need to find a way to work together if we're both going to stay on the ranch. It won't be easy. Few worthwhile things are, Lillian remarked, her gaze on the horizon where the sun was beginning its descent. But if you both want to make it work, you'll find a way. The conversation lapsed into comfortable silence as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Beau was acutely aware of Lillian beside him, of the scent of lavender that seemed to cling to her skin, of the way the fading light caught in her hair. He wanted to reach for her hand but hesitated, uncertain if such a gesture would be welcome. I should get back, Lillian said eventually, rising from her seat. Dr. Harrison will be wondering where I've disappeared to. Of course, Beau agreed, standing as well. Thank you for the company and for your insight about Daniel. As she gathered her shawl, their eyes met, and something in the air between them shifted, a tension that hadn't been there before or perhaps had always been there, unacknowledged. For a moment, Beau thought she might say something more, but she simply nodded, offering a small smile before turning to go. Lillian, he called after her, acting on impulse. When she turned back, he found himself momentarily at a loss for words. Would you? That is, I was wondering if you might like to have dinner with me tomorrow. Not here at the cabin, but in town, at the hotel restaurant, perhaps. The invitation hung between them, more significant than its simple words suggested. This wasn't a patient asking his caretaker for company during his recovery. It was a man asking a woman to dine with him in public, a clear indication of interest that went beyond friendship. Lillian's expression was unreadable for a long moment, and Beau began to regret his boldness. But then she smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes and transformed her face. I would like that very much, Beau. Relief and pleasure flooded through him. Good, that's good. Shall I call for you at the doctor's house around 6? 6 would be perfect, she agreed. Her cheeks flushed with a hint of color that the sunset alone couldn't explain. As she walked away, Beau remained standing outside the cabin, watching until she disappeared from view. The prospect of dinner with Lillian the following evening filled him with an anticipation he hadn't felt in years, perhaps ever. This wasn't the illicit attraction he had felt for Sarah, born of loneliness and poor judgment. This was something cleaner, more honest, yet no less powerful. For the first time since Daniel had pulled the trigger, Beau allowed himself to believe that perhaps Lillian was right, perhaps he did deserve better than the punishment he had been so ready to accept. Perhaps he deserved a chance at redemption, at happiness, at a future that wasn't defined by his mistakes. With that thought warming him against the growing chill of evening, Beau turned and went back into the cabin, already planning what he would wear to dinner the following night. The hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in Redemption Creek, which wasn't saying much, but they set a decent table and kept the place clean, which was more than could be said for the saloon at the other end of town. Beau arrived at Dr. Harrison's house precisely at 6, wearing his best shirt and the new vest he'd purchased that morning from the general store. Dr. Harrison answered the door, looking Beau up and down with an appraising eye. Well, don't you clean up nicely, Easton, he remarked, a hint of amusement in his voice. Come in, Lillian will be ready in a moment. The doctor led Beau into a small parlor furnished with comfortable but well-worn furniture. I understand you're taking Miss Faulkner to dinner, he said, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. Yes, sir, Beau confirmed, recognizing the protective interest behind the doctor's scrutiny. If that meets with your approval. Harrison studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. Lillian is a grown woman capable of making her own decisions, but she's also someone I care about greatly. She's had enough heartache for one lifetime, Easton. I understand, Beau said quietly, and I have no intention of adding to it. Before the doctor could respond, there was a sound at the parlor door and both men turned to see Lillian standing there. Beau's breath caught in his throat at the sight of her. She wore a dress he hadn't seen before, a deep blue that brought out the gray of her eyes, with delicate embroidery around the collar and cuffs. Her hair was arranged differently as well, still pulled back but with soft curls framing her face. You look beautiful, Beau said simply, the words escaping before he could consider them. Lillian's cheeks colored slightly at the compliment. "Thank you, you look quite handsome yourself." Dr. Harrison cleared his throat, reminding them of his presence. "Well, don't let me keep you. Enjoy your evening." As they stepped out into the early evening air, Beau offered Lillian his arm, which she took with a smile that sent warmth spreading through his chest. They walked the short distance to the hotel in companionable silence, both aware of the curious glances they received from townspeople who knew Beau as the cowboy who'd been shot by his brother and Lillian as the doctor's reserved assistant. The hotel restaurant was relatively quiet, with only a few other diners scattered around the room. The maitre d' a grandiose title for the hotel owner's son, who served as host on busy nights, led them to a table by the window, where they could see the main street of Redemption Creek bathed in the golden light of sunset. "I'm afraid the menu isn't very extensive," Beau apologized as they were seated, "but the steak is usually good." "I'm not particular," Lillian assured him with a smile. "This is lovely, Beau, thank you for suggesting it." They ordered steak for Beau, chicken for Lillian, and a bottle of wine that the waiter proudly informed them had come all the way from California, and settled into conversation that flowed as easily as it had during their afternoons at the cabin. "How's your shoulder tonight?" Lillian asked, her eyes assessing him with professional interest. "Much better," Beau replied truthfully. "Still sore if I move it the wrong way, but the pain is manageable without laudanum now. You're healing remarkably quickly," she observed. "Another week and you should be able to resume most normal activities, though I'd still advise against anything too strenuous. Like getting shot again," Beau suggested with a wry smile. Lillian laughed, the sound bright and genuine. "Yes, I would definitely advise against that." "Once is quite enough, don't you think?" "More than enough," Beau agreed, enjoying the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled. "Though I have to admit, if getting shot was what it took to meet you, I can't entirely regret it." The words hung between them, more earnest than he had intended, revealing more of his feelings than he had planned. Lillian's expression softened, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his heart beat faster. "That's a rather dramatic way to make a new acquaintance," she said, her tone light but her gaze serious. "There are easier methods, you know, such as," Beau asked, leaning slightly forward. "You could have simply introduced yourself at church on Sunday," she suggested. "Or at the Founders' Day picnic last month. Would you have noticed me?" Beau wondered aloud. "If I had just been another cowboy tipping his hat to you across a crowded church." Lillian considered this, her head tilting slightly as she studied him. "Yes," she finally said, her voice soft but certain. "I think I would have." The admission sent a surge of pleasure through Beau's chest. Before he could respond, their food arrived, momentarily diverting their attention. As they began to eat, the conversation shifted to lighter topics, the latest town gossip, the upcoming cattle drive season, the new schoolteacher who had arrived from Pennsylvania the previous month. It was only when they had finished their meal and were sharing a slice of apple pie that Beau broached the subject that had been on his mind since receiving Daniel's letter. "I've been thinking about what happens next," he said, setting down his fork. "With the ranch with Daniel. I can't avoid it forever." Lillian nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Have you decided what you want to do?" "I want to try to rebuild things with my brother," Beau said simply. "It won't be easy and it might not even be possible, but I need to try. That ranch has been our home since we were boys. It's all we have left of our parents." "When will you go back?" Lillian asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Soon," Beau replied. "In a few days, maybe. My shoulder's healing well enough that I can ride without too much discomfort." Lillian nodded again, her eyes lowered to her plate. "I think that's wise. The sooner you and your brother can begin to work through what happened, the better." There was something in her tone, a slight reserve that hadn't been there before that gave Beau pause. "Lillian," he said softly, waiting until she looked up at him. "My returning to the ranch doesn't mean I'm leaving Redemption Creek entirely. I'll still be close by." "Of course," she said quickly, a small smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I didn't think otherwise." But Beau could see that she had interpreted his decision to return to the ranch as a kind of ending to whatever had been growing between them. And perhaps, in her experience, it was reasonable to assume that men left and didn't return. After all, her husband had left for work one morning and never come home again, claimed by the same illness that took their daughter. "Lillian," he said again, more firmly this time, "I don't know exactly what's happening between us, but I know it's not something I want to walk away from. The ranch is only 5 miles from town. I can ride that in less than an hour." Her eyes met his vulnerability and hope mingled in their gray depths. "You have a lot to focus on right now, Beau. Rebuilding your relationship with your brother won't be easy. I wouldn't want to complicate that for you." "Some complications are worth it," Beau said softly, reaching across the table to take her hand. "If you think this us might be one of them." For a long moment, Lillian was silent, her gaze steady on his face as if searching for something there. Whatever she was looking for, she seemed to find it because her expression softened and she turned her hand in his, lacing their fingers together. "I think it might be," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. The simple admission filled Beau with a joy so intense it nearly took his breath away. "Then we'll figure it out," he promised, "together." As they left the restaurant later that evening, walking slowly back toward the doctor's house with Lillian's hand tucked into the crook of Beau's arm, the weight that had settled on his chest the moment Daniel pulled the trigger seemed to lift slightly. There was still much to resolve with his brother, still guilt to be reckoned with and trust to rebuild. But for the first time, Beau could see a path forward that included not just atonement for his mistakes, but the possibility of happiness he hadn't dared to hope for. At the doctor's door, they paused, reluctant to end the evening despite the lateness of the hour. In the soft light of the porch lamp, Lillian's face was half in shadow, making her eyes seem darker and more mysterious. "Thank you for tonight," she said softly. "I enjoyed it more than I can say." "So did I," Beau replied, his voice equally low. "I'd like to do it again. Soon." Lillian smiled, the expression transforming her face in a way that made Beau's heart skip. "I'd like that too." There was a moment of charged silence, both of them aware of the desire to move closer, to bridge the small space that separated them. Beau hesitated, not wanting to rush her, not wanting to assume too much based on one dinner and a few conversations. But it was Lillian who made the decision, rising slightly on her toes to press a gentle kiss to his cheek. "Good night, Beau," she whispered, her breath warm against his skin. "Good night, Lillian," he replied, fighting the urge to turn his head and capture her lips with his own. There would be time for that, he told himself. Time to explore what was growing between them without the shadow of guilt and pain that had marked their first meeting. As Lillian slipped inside, closing the door softly behind her, Beau stood for a moment longer on the porch, touching his fingers to the spot where her lips had brushed his cheek. Then, with a smile he couldn't have suppressed if he'd tried, he turned and walked back toward the cabin, his steps lighter than they had been in months. 3 days later, Beau rode out to the ranch, his shoulder still tender but healed enough for the journey. Dr. Harrison had given him a clean bill of health, though with strict instructions not to overexert himself for at least another week. "Your body needs time," the doctor had insisted during his final examination. "Rushing the healing process will only set you back." Lillian had been present for this last appointment, her professional demeanor firmly in place despite the private smiles they had exchanged when the doctor's back was turned. They had spent every evening together since their dinner at the hotel, walking through town, sharing meals at the cabin, talking long into the night about everything and nothing. They hadn't spoken explicitly about what would happen when Beau returned to the ranch, but the unspoken understanding was clear. This wasn't an ending, merely a shift in their routine. He would ride into town when he could, and she would visit the ranch when her duties at the doctor's office allowed. "Be careful," Lillian had said as they said goodbye that morning, her hand lingering on his arm. "And remember what Dr. Harrison said about not overexerting yourself." "I'll remember," Beau had promised, covering her hand with his own. "I'll be back in town in a few days, once Daniel and I have had a chance to talk things through." The ride to the ranch was peaceful, the late spring landscape lush with wildflowers and new growth. As he crested the final hill and saw the ranch spread out below him, the house his father had built, the barn he and Daniel had expanded, the corral where they broke horses. Beau felt a complex mix of emotions. Love for the place that had always been home, anxiety about facing his brother again, and a deep, abiding guilt that he suspected would never fully leave him. Daniel was in the barn when Beau rode in, mending a saddle with the careful attention to detail that had always characterized his work. He looked up at the sound of hoofbeats, his expression guarded but not hostile as Beau dismounted. "You're looking better," Daniel observed, setting aside the saddle. "Shoulders healed up, mostly," Beau confirmed, removing his hat as he approached. "Doc says I need to take it easy for another week or so, but I'm well enough to be useful." Daniel nodded, his eyes assessing as they took in Beau's appearance. "Good, there's plenty that needs doing around here." The statement was simple, practical, but Beau understood the significance behind it. Daniel wasn't just acknowledging his presence. He was accepting Beau back into the work of the ranch, back into their shared life, at least on a provisional basis. "I'm sorry," Beau said quietly, needing to say the words again now that they were face to face on their own land. "For everything, Daniel. I know words don't change what happened, but I need you to know how deeply I regret it." Daniel was silent for a long moment, his gaze steady on Beau's face. "I believe you," he finally said, "and I'm sorry too for shooting you. It wasn't who we are. Who we were raised to be. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was acknowledgement or recognition that they had both acted in ways that betrayed their better selves, their shared values. It was, Beau thought, a place to start. How are we going to do this?" he asked directly. "Working together, living together, it won't be easy." "No," Daniel agreed, his tone matter-of-fact. "It won't be, but this ranch needs both of us, and I'm willing to try if you are." "I am," Beau confirmed, relief washing through him at his brother's willingness to attempt reconciliation. "Whatever it takes, Daniel." They spent the rest of the day working side by side, falling back into the familiar rhythms of ranch life. There were awkward moments, silences that stretched too long, occasional flashes of tension when something reminded them of what had happened. But there were also glimpses of their old rapport, a shared joke about a particularly stubborn calf, a moment of wordless cooperation as they repaired a broken gate, the easy competence that came from years of working together. That evening, as they sat on the porch after dinner, the conversation turned to the future of the ranch. Daniel had ideas for expanding their operation, possibly buying the adjacent property that had recently come up for sale. Beau listened attentively, offering suggestions and asking questions, the discussion feeling almost normal until Daniel mentioned, casually, that he'd heard Beau had been spending time with Dr. Harrison's assistant. "News travels fast," Beau observed, not entirely surprised that their dinner at the hotel had become a topic of town gossip. "It's a small place," Daniel reminded him, echoing Lillian's words from their first real conversation. "People notice things. Especially when it involves a man who was recently shot by his own brother." There was no accusation in his tone, just a statement of fact, but Beau felt a flicker of apprehension nonetheless. "Miss Faulkner, she's been kind to me, more than kind." Daniel nodded slowly, considering this. "She seems like a respectable woman. The doctor thinks highly of her." "She is," Beau agreed, relief mingling with a deeper emotion at being able to speak openly about Lillian to his brother. "She's remarkable, actually. Strong, intelligent, compassionate. She's been through a lot, lost her husband and daughter to influenza back east before coming here." "And you care for her," Daniel said, not a question but an observation. Beau met his brother's gaze directly. "Yes, I do." Daniel was quiet for a moment, looking out at the darkening landscape. "Just be sure, Beau," he finally said, his voice low. "Be sure it's real this time, not just loneliness or guilt or whatever it was with Sarah." The comparison stung, but Beau couldn't deny his brother the right to make it. "It's different," he said simply, "what I feel for Lillian. It's not like anything I've felt before." Daniel studied him for a long moment, then nodded, accepting Beau's words at face value. "Good, then I hope it works out for you both." The conversation moved on to other topics, but Beau found himself dwelling on Daniel's question. Was he sure? Was what he felt for Lillian real, substantial, built to last? Or was it just gratitude for her care, attraction to her quiet beauty, relief at finding someone who seemed to believe he was worthy of redemption? As he lay in his bed that night, in the room that had been his since childhood, Beau examined his feelings with an honesty he hadn't applied to his attraction to Sarah. What he found reassured him. His feelings for Lillian weren't born of forbidden excitement or momentary weakness. They had grown gradually, rooted in genuine admiration for her character, pleasure in her company, and a deepening connection that made him want to be a better man, the kind of man who deserved the second chance she seemed willing to give him. Yes, he was sure. Whatever was developing between them was real. And if she felt the same way, if the soft looks and lingering touches and evenings spent in conversation meant what he hoped they meant, then perhaps the path forward included not just reconciliation with his brother, but a future with Lillian as well. With that thought comforting him, Beau drifted off to sleep, his dreams filled not with guilt and regret, but with possibilities he hadn't dared to imagine a few weeks earlier. The following days settled into a new routine. Beau and Daniel worked together during the day, rebuilding not just their ranch but the trust between them. The process wasn't without its difficult moments. There were times when the weight of what had happened pressed in on them both, when the absence of Sarah was a palpable presence in the house they had all once shared. But slowly, conversation by conversation, task by task, they began to find their way back to something resembling the brotherhood they had once taken for granted. True to his word, Beau rode into town 3 days after returning to the ranch, his heart quickening as he approached Dr. Harrison's house. Lillian was in the garden when he arrived, kneeling among the herbs she used for various medicinal purposes. She looked up at the sound of his approach, her face lighting with a smile that made the 5-mile ride worth every minute. "You came," she said simply, rising to greet him. "I said I would," Beau reminded her, dismounting and tying his horse to the fence post. "Did you doubt me?" Lillian's expression turned thoughtful. "Not doubted exactly, but I know how complicated things are with your brother. I wouldn't have blamed you if you needed more time." Beau stepped closer, drawn by the sincerity in her eyes. "Things with Daniel are getting better slowly, but I didn't want to wait any longer to see you." A faint blush colored her cheeks at his words. "I'm glad. I've missed our conversations. Just the conversations." Beau asked, a teasing note entering his voice as he closed the distance between them. Lillian's blush deepened, but her gaze remained steady on his face. "Not just the conversations, no." The admission, simple as it was, gave Beau the courage to reach for her hand, lacing their fingers together as they had at the restaurant. "I've missed everything about you, Lillian." They spent the afternoon walking through town, talking about the days they had been apart. Lillian had been busy with a minor outbreak of measles among the children of Redemption Creek, spending long hours helping Dr. Harrison tend to worried parents and uncomfortable children. Beau shared the progress he and Daniel had made on the ranch, both in their work and in their cautious steps toward reconciliation. "He asked about you," Beau mentioned as they sat on a bench near the small town square, watching as the afternoon activity ebbed and flowed around them. "Your brother." Lillian asked, surprised. "What did he say?" "He'd heard we'd been spending time together," Beau explained. "Wanted to know if it was serious, I suppose." Lillian's expression turned careful. "And what did you tell him?" Beau considered his answer, aware that his words would reveal more about his feelings than perhaps he had explicitly expressed to Lillian before. "I told him that what I feel for you is unlike anything I've felt before." The simple truth hung between them, a declaration that wasn't quite a declaration but carried the weight of one nonetheless. Lillian's eyes widened slightly, her lips parting in a small inhalation of surprise. "Beau," she began, her voice soft but steady, "I need to be sure you're not just grateful for my care when you were injured, for not judging you when you told me what happened with your brother and Sarah." The question echoed his own late-night musings, and Beau appreciated her directness. "I am grateful for those things," he acknowledged. "But what I feel for you goes far beyond gratitude, Lillian. I admire your strength, your compassion, your intelligence. I enjoy your company more than anyone I've ever known. When I'm with you, I feel like a better version of myself, the man I want to be rather than the man I've sometimes been." Lillian's expression softened as he spoke, vulnerability replacing caution in her eyes. "I feel the same way," she admitted quietly, "but I'm afraid too. It's been so long since I've allowed myself to care for someone this way. After Thomas and Emily died, I thought that part of my life was over." "And now," Beau prompted gently, his heart beating faster at her admission. "Now I find myself thinking about possibilities I'd given up on," she said, her gaze direct despite the emotion in her voice. "A future that includes more than just survival." The simple honesty of her words moved Beau deeply. Without thinking, he reached up to touch her cheek, his fingers gentle against her skin. "Lillian," he said softly, "may I kiss you?" Her answer was to lean forward, closing the distance between them as her lips met his in a kiss that was tentative at first, then increasingly certain as they both surrendered to the feelings that had been building between them since that first conversation in the doctor's spare room. When they finally pulled apart, Beau was aware of the public nature of their embrace, of the curious glances from passers-by, the likelihood that by evening, everyone in Redemption Creek would know that Beau Easton and Lillian Faulkner had been seen kissing on a bench in the town square. "I should probably take you home," he said reluctantly, though he made no move to rise from the bench. "Before we give the town gossips even more to talk about." Lillian laughed, the sound bright with a joy he hadn't heard from her before. "I suppose you're right. Though I find I don't mind the idea of being talked about if it's with you." The walk back to Dr. Harrison's house was marked by a new awareness between them, their hands frequently brushing as they moved side by side. When they reached the doctor's porch, Beau was reluctant to say goodbye, knowing it would be several days before he could return to town. "When can I see you again?" he asked, standing close enough that he could catch the scent of lavender that seemed to cling to her skin. "I have Sundays free," Lillian replied. "If you'd like to come for dinner. Dr. Harrison usually dines with friends in the evening, so we would have some privacy." "I'd like that very much," Beau agreed, already looking forward to the day despite it being nearly a week away. "Sunday, then." This time, it was Beau who initiated the goodbye kiss, his lips finding hers with a confidence born of her earlier response. When they parted, the look in Lillian's eyes, a mixture of happiness and something deeper, more profound, stayed with him all the way back to the ranch, a warmth in his chest that not even the prospect of facing Daniel's knowing gaze could diminish. As spring gave way to early summer, Beau fell into a rhythm that balanced his responsibilities at the ranch with his growing relationship with Lillian. Sundays became sacred, the day he rode into town early, attended church with Lillian and Dr. Harrison, then spent the afternoon and evening in Lillian's company. Sometimes they dined at the hotel restaurant, sometimes at the doctor's house when Harrison was out, and occasionally, as the weather warmed, they packed a simple meal and ate outdoors, finding privacy in the beauty of the surrounding countryside. With each passing week, their connection deepened, conversations moving from shared histories to shared dreams, from cautious hopes to more concrete plans. Beau spoke of his vision for the ranch, of the legacy he and Daniel were building. Lillian shared her thoughts on potentially opening a small clinic of her own someday, using the medical knowledge she had acquired first from her husband and then from Dr. Harrison. On the ranch, Beau's relationship with Daniel continued to heal, though there were still moments of tension, still conversations that ended abruptly when they strayed too close to the subject of Sarah. But the anger that had driven Daniel to pull the trigger that spring morning seemed to have dissipated, replaced by a wary acceptance of their new reality. They were brothers who had hurt each other deeply, but who were choosing, day by day, to rebuild what had been damaged. It was on a warm evening in early July, as Beau and Lillian walked along the creek that gave the town its name, that Beau finally found the courage to speak the words that had been in his heart for weeks. "I love you," he said simply, stopping beneath the shade of a cottonwood tree to face her directly. "I think I've loved you since that night you told me I deserved better than I believed. I just wanted you to know that." Lillian's eyes widened slightly, though there was no surprise in them, only a soft acceptance, as if she had been waiting for him to reach the conclusion she had already arrived at. "I love you too, Beau," she replied, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. More than I thought possible after everything that happened. The admission filled Beau with a joy so complete it seemed to illuminate him from within. Without hesitation, he drew her into his arms, his kiss conveying what words could not: the depth of his feelings, the certainty of his commitment, the promise of a future together. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless and smiling, Beau knew with absolute clarity what he wanted to ask next. But first, there was something he needed to address: a ghost that had lingered between them since the beginning. "When I first told you what happened with Daniel and Sarah," he began carefully, "you said I deserved better than the punishment I thought I deserved. Do you still believe that?" Lillian considered the question with the thoughtfulness he had come to treasure in her. "Yes," she finally said. "Not because what you did wasn't wrong, it was, but because one mistake, even a serious one, shouldn't define a person's entire worth. You've shown true remorse, Beau. You've worked to make amends with your brother. You've tried to be better, to do better. That's what matters." Her answer confirmed what Beau had begun to believe himself: that redemption was possible, that the path forward wasn't determined solely by past mistakes, but by present choices and future intentions. "Thank you," he said softly, "for seeing something in me worth believing in, even when I couldn't see it myself." Lillian smiled, her hand coming up to rest against his cheek. "That's what love does, I think. It helps us see the best in each other, even when we can't see it ourselves." With her words giving him courage, Beau took both her hands in his. "Lillian, I know we haven't known each other long, not by most people's standards, and I know we both carry experiences that have shaped us in ways that make us cautious. But I also know, with a certainty I've never felt before, that I want to spend my life with you." Lillian's breath caught, her eyes widening as she understood where his words were leading. "I'm not asking for an immediate answer," Beau continued, his voice steady despite the racing of his heart. "I know you might need time to consider what this would mean: moving to the ranch, building a life with me there. But I want you to know that when you're ready, if you're ready, I want to marry you, Lillian Faulkner. I want to create a future together that's better than either of us imagined was possible after everything we've been through." For a long moment, Lillian was silent, her eyes searching his face as if to measure the sincerity of his words. Then slowly, a smile spread across her features, not the reserved smile he had first seen in the doctor's spare room, but a radiant expression of joy that transformed her entire countenance. "Yes," she said simply, her voice clear and confident. "Yes, I will marry you, Beau Easton." Beau's heart soared at her immediate acceptance. "You're sure? You don't need time to think about it?" Lillian's smile turned tender. "I've had plenty of time to think about it, about you, about us. I know my own heart, Beau, and it belongs to you." With a joy too great for words, Beau gathered her in his arms again, lifting her slightly off the ground as he kissed her beneath the spreading branches of the cottonwood tree. In that moment, everything that had led them to this point: the shot fired in anger, the wound that had brought them together, the conversations that had revealed their souls to each other, seemed not like a series of random events, but a path designed specifically to bring them to this place, this time, this perfect understanding of what they meant to each other. When Beau finally set Lillian back on her feet, they were both laughing, giddy with the decision they had just made. "We should tell Dr. Harrison," Lillian said, her eyes bright with happiness. "And your brother, Daniel, should hear it from you first." "We'll tell them both," Beau agreed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with gentle fingers. Tonight, I just want to be here with you, knowing that we've chosen each other, knowing that whatever comes next, we'll face it together." As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the creek and the town beyond, Beau and Lillian walked hand in hand back toward Redemption Creek. Their path forward wasn't without challenges. There would be adjustments as Lillian moved to the ranch, negotiations about how she might continue her medical work while living 5 miles from town, conversations with Daniel about integrating a new person into the home they had shared for so long. But as they reached the edge of town, where the buildings glowed golden in the evening light, Beau felt a certainty that whatever obstacles arose, they would overcome them together. The shot that had nearly ended his life that spring morning had instead become the catalyst for a new beginning, one that included not just reconciliation with his brother, but a love he had never dared to hope for. "I deserved it," he had said to Daniel as blood soaked through his shirt and pain radiated through his shoulder. "You deserve better," Lillian had told him later, her eyes seeing beyond his guilt to the man he could become. And now, with Lillian's hand in his and the promise of a future together stretching before them, Beau finally allowed himself to believe that she had been right all along. 3 months later, on a crisp October morning with the cottonwoods turning gold along the creek, Beau Easton and Lillian Faulkner were married in the small church in Redemption Creek. The ceremony was simple but beautiful, attended by nearly everyone in town as well as ranchers from the surrounding area who had known Beau and Daniel for years. Dr. Harrison gave the bride away, his usual gruff manner softened by evident emotion as he placed Lillian's hand in Beau's at the altar. Daniel stood as Beau's best man, a decision that had surprised some but felt right to the brothers, a visible symbol of the reconciliation they had worked toward all summer. As they exchanged vows, Beau found himself marveling at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the pain and betrayal of that spring morning to the joy of this autumn day, it had been a path neither of them could have anticipated, but one that had led them exactly where they were meant to be. The reception was held at the ranch, the house decorated with wildflowers and the tables set out under the trees in the yard. As the celebration continued around them, Beau found a moment to pull Lillian aside, leading her to a quiet spot away from the festivities. "Mrs. Easton," he said, still savoring the sound of her new name on his lips. "Are you happy?" Lillian's smile was answer enough, but she put it into words as well. "More than I ever thought possible," she assured him, her hand coming up to rest against his cheek. "Are you?" "Completely," Beau replied, drawing her close. "Though I must admit I'm looking forward to when all these well-wishers go home and I can have my wife to myself." Lillian laughed, the sound bright with joy and promise. "Patience, Mr. Easton, we have the rest of our lives together." The rest of their lives. The phrase filled Beau with a contentment so deep it seemed to settle into his very bones. As they rejoined their guests hand in hand, he caught sight of Daniel across the yard, raising a glass in silent acknowledgement. Beau nodded in return, gratitude for his brother's presence and his blessing welling up inside him. The celebration continued as the afternoon gave way to evening, lanterns being lit as darkness fell and music filling the air as a local fiddle player struck up a tune. Beau led Lillian in a dance beneath the stars, aware of the eyes upon them but focused entirely on the woman in his arms, his wife, his partner, the future he had never expected but now couldn't imagine living without. "I love you," he whispered as they moved across the makeshift dance floor. "Today, tomorrow, always. And I love you," Lillian replied, her eyes reflecting the starlight above them, more than words can say. As they danced beneath the vast Texas sky, surrounded by friends and family, Beau knew with absolute certainty that the shot that had once seemed like an ending had in fact been the beginning of the greatest chapter of his life, a chapter written not in guilt and retribution, but in forgiveness, redemption, and a love that had the power to heal even the deepest wounds. In Lillian's eyes, in her touch, in her unwavering belief in him, Beau had found not just the love of his life, but the better man he had always hoped to be. And in that discovery, he had found a truth more powerful than any mistake, any regret, any moment of weakness. That sometimes the path to redemption begins with a single voice telling you that you deserve better than you believe.